Documents reveals George Washington wrote about St. Augustine. On President's Day, historian, Roger Smith, we love him, unveils a lesser-known narrative surrounding George Washington's strategic interest in St. Augustine during the Revolutionary War. Smith's research unearthed 81 letters penned by Washington, shedding light on his view of St. Augustine as a military target or concern. Delving into British archives at the University of Florida and combing through Washington's correspondence at the Library of Congress, Smith uncovered insights overlooked in conventional history education. Among the discovered letters is one dated December 18th, 1775. Isn't that Mike Davis's year?
Yeah, that's when he graduated high school.
Very similar, yeah. Or originating in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where Washington mentions intercepting British correspondence detailing arms and stockpiled in St. Augustine's Castillo de San Marcos. At the time, Florida comprised two British colonies, East Florida and West Florida, were largely pro-British territories, posing a threat to the American cause. Despite initial gains, British forces eventually reclaimed St. Augustine, prompting the further American incursions authorized by Congress. Smith's research challenges the notion that the Revolutionary War was confined to regions directly commanded by Washington, highlighting the border scope of the conflict and Washington's strategic foresight extending to Florida. Interesting facts, sir. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it only makes sense. I mean, this was British rule. We weren't really a part of the U.S. until 1821. Oh, okay. So it was British rule, and then after this Revolutionary, it reverted back to Spain. So it would make sense, supply lines and some of those things. If British had control here, it would make sense that it would be supported from the South in a lot of ways too. It wouldn't just be isolated. I mean, the generals of England at the time were supposed to be the superior strategic people, but they were fighting like 4 wars all over the world at that point.
Yeah.
That point.
So
it would make sense, and luckily Washington was smart enough to recognize that was a threat. So it sounds like, okay, we need to keep our eye on it down here is kind of the way I read that, and not just ignore the threat from the southern side.
But finding some artifacts like this, is this significant in history? Is that changing anything? Changing the narrative?
No, I mean, it's a great find, but it's kind of one of those things. Historian people probably knew it existed. Okay. They just didn't have it in hand.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody who's a person of history is shocked by this in any way, shape, or form. Like, oh my gosh, you find it. But
St. Augustine was significant back in the day.
No, it was significant. I mean, it was a like I said, everybody wanted their hands on it. I mean, that's why Spain took it back, because their support of the colonies. That they took Florida back after that, and then we got it in 1821. The U.S. got it in 1821.
What was the better rule?
It became a state in 1845.
Do you think St. Augustine prospered better with Spanish rule or British rule?
I don't think British rule really, it had some influence on us, but I don't think the British rule, because it was only like 20 years, created a major influence on St. Augustine. I mean, there was some architectural things. There's colonial architectural from the British, because they changed some of the first Spanish area a little bit to make it more British.
Okay, the look, the aesthetic.
Yeah, the aesthetic. Okay. So some of those things got changed. So Spanish. The first Spanish rule was the most significant to setting who we are, and then the British rule was, like I said, it wasn't very long, and then the second Spanish, they kind of just came back, but not everybody came back.
Interesting. Okay.
So like when it was British rule, everybody kind of went to Cuba. A lot of people went to Cuba, so we lost a lot of people when it went from Spanish to British, and not as many people came back when it went from British back to Spanish.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally does. Yeah, not everybody came back to the party.
So how did British rule impact Fort Mose then?
Fort Mose had already been gone by that point.
Really?
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, it got washed away at that point already. Oh. But what it was is there were free blacks and most of those went to Cuba that were living in the city, and it affected those individuals quite a bit. Like you didn't want to be a free black man in under British rule.
Yeah.
You know, so that affected them. They kind of didn't have a choice. They just went to Cuba.
Right. Well, weren't they already Catholic? Were they converted to Catholic?
Well, and a lot of the ones that didn't go to Cuba migrated to Seminoles. So you hear of the Black Seminoles and some of those things. Some of those free black men went into some of the Seminole tribes in Central Florida.
Okay.
Like we only think of Seminole down south, but there was Seminole tribes near like Claremont and Ocala area and that area too. Like the Black Seminoles were in that area also, and that kind of forced that portion of history to take place when British took over from the Spanish.
Gotcha.
So
wow. Well, George Washington knew what was going on.
Yeah,
he was part of the pulse.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, at that time, I mean, you know, St. Augustine was bigger than Calford.
Yeah.
So Calford is Jacksonville.
Yeah.
So Andrew Jackson hadn't been born yet, so it wasn't Jacksonville yet.
Right.
So
it was just St. Augustine was probably the proper.
Yeah, St. Augustine was the city, and I think Key West might have been more populated than St. Augustine, but it was those were 1 and 2 in the state as far as population of the state of Florida.
Oh,
so
isn't that interesting?
And Pensacola was over there doing their thing, and at that point it was still East and West Florida.
Right.
And I believe it's the British that just made it Florida.
Okay.
So somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that.
But that's interesting though. Yeah.